It was 1878, and the unforgiving territory between Santa Fe and Los Lunas had already claimed the life of their driver, poor Mr. Fitzwilliam, who'd succumbed to a rattlesnake bite 2 days prior. The 5 women, all mail-order brides heading to meet prospective husbands, were now stranded with a broken axle and dwindling supplies. As the rider drew closer, Harriet could make out the silhouette of a man atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. His broad-brimmed hat shielded his face from view, but there was something in the way he sat his horse that suggested both confidence and caution. "Ladies," he called out, his voice carrying across the plains as he approached. "Appears you're in a spot of trouble." He dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than on solid ground. As he removed his hat, Harriet found herself staring into the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome nonetheless. "Quinn Jacobson." He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Ranch hand from the Diamond J, about 15 miles east of Los Lunas." "We would be eternally grateful, Mr. Jacobson." "Quinn," he corrected, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Out here, formality doesn't mean much." He helped the weakest woman, elderly Mrs. Perkins, onto his horse first. "Hold tight to the saddle horn, madam. I'll lead you on foot." Before departing, he handed Harriet his canteen. "Share this. I'll be back for the next of you within the hour." True to his word, Quinn returned after delivering Mrs. Perkins to safety. One by one, he ferried the remaining women to his modest camp, first young Beatrice, then the twins Clara and Catherine. Each time he returned, Harriet insisted on being the last to leave. "Your selflessness is admirable, Miss Norton," Quinn remarked as he finally helped her mount his horse. "Foolish, but admirable." His hands were strong and calloused as they circled her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the saddle. The contact sent an unexpected flutter through her chest, something she attributed to exhaustion and relief. Quinn's camp proved to be a small but well-organized affair tucked into a natural alcove of rock formations. A clear spring bubbled nearby, and the women had already set about making themselves useful boiling water, preparing a simple meal from Quinn's supplies. "It's not much," Quinn apologized as he helped Harriet dismount. "It's salvation," she replied simply. That evening, as they sat around the campfire, Quinn explained his situation. "I was scouting grazing land for my employer when I spotted your wagon. Divine providence, perhaps, or the kindness of a stranger," Harriet countered, passing him a tin cup of coffee. "Where were you ladies headed?" "I can hardly leave 5 women to fend for themselves in Indian territory, can I?" He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Besides, I know these lands better than most. I'll see you safely to Los Lunas." The next morning, Quinn fashioned a travois for Mrs. Perkins, who couldn't manage the long walk. They set off at dawn, with Quinn leading his horse and the women following single file. Harriet found herself walking beside him, drawn to his quiet competence and occasional dry humor. "You're not what I expected from a ranch hand," she ventured as they crossed a shallow stream. "And what did you expect, Miss Norton?" he asked, offering his arm to help her over the slippery rocks. "Less Shakespeare, more spitting," she replied candidly, accepting his assistance. Quinn laughed, a surprisingly rich sound. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She made sure her sons could quote the bard as easily as they could rope a steer." "Sons? You have brothers?" A shadow crossed his face. "Had. Lost both to the war. Pa followed them to the grave not long after." "I'm sorry," Harriet said softly, suddenly aware of the depth of loss hidden behind his calm exterior. "Life out here teaches you to keep moving forward," he replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Speaking of which, we should pick up our pace if we want to reach the next water source by nightfall." As they traveled, Quinn shared his knowledge of the land, which plants were edible, how to spot water from distant signs, the meaning of various animal tracks. In turn, Harriet told him about growing up in Boston, losing her parents to influenza, and her decision to seek a new life in the West. "My intended is a merchant named Harold Benson," she explained on the second night of their journey. "He wrote that he's established a successful general store and is seeking a lady of refinement to be his wife." Quinn poked at the fire with a stick, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "And are you? A lady of refinement?" Harriet laughed softly. I suppose I was once. Now I'm just a woman who's walked 20 miles in 2 days and hasn't had a proper bath in over a week. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as they spotted the bluffs, and within minutes, they were caught in a downpour. Quinn led them to a shallow cave in the rock face, just deep enough to provide shelter from the worst of the deluge. Inside, they huddled together for warmth as thunder rolled across the plains. Quinn worked quickly to build a small fire near the cave entrance, using the driest kindling from his saddlebags. "You're shivering," he observed, noticing Harriet's trembling form. Without hesitation, he removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she protested, though she clutched the warm fabric gratefully. "I've weathered worse," he assured her, settling beside her as the other women clustered around the small fire. The storm intensified, forcing them to spend the night in the cave. As the others dozed off, exhausted from their journey, Harriet found herself alone with Quinn, watching the rain create a silver curtain across the cave entrance. "You never mentioned why you became a ranch hand," she said softly, conscious of the sleeping women nearby. They sat in companionable silence for a long while, watching the stars wheel overhead, until Harriet reluctantly returned to her bedroll, aware that tomorrow would bring difficult goodbyes. Morning came too quickly. As they packed up camp for the final leg of their journey, an unexpected tension hung in the air. Quinn was more reserved than usual, his instructions brief and his smile absent. They crested a hill around midday, and there below them sprawled the modest settlement of Los Lunas. Smoke rose from chimneys, and they could make out figures moving through the dusty streets. The arrival of 5 women caused immediate sensation, with townspeople emerging from shops and homes to stare openly at the bedraggled group. A portly man in a well-tailored suit pushed through the gathering crowd, his face a mixture of surprise and relief. "Miss Norton? Harriet Norton?" Harriet stepped forward, suddenly acutely aware of her dusty appearance and tangled hair. "Mr. Benson, I presume?" Harold Benson was older than his letters had suggested, perhaps in his late 40s, with thinning hair and a carefully trimmed mustache. He took her gloved hand, bowing slightly. Perkins was led away to the doctor's office. Harold Benson turned his attention to Quinn. "And you are, sir?" "Quinn Jacobson. I found these ladies stranded after their driver died. Helped them reach town safely." Benson's face lit up with understanding. "Then we owe you a great debt, Mr. Jacobson. You must allow me to offer you a reward for returning my bride-to-be." Quinn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No reward necessary. Anyone would have done the same." "Nonsense. At the very least, you must join us for dinner this evening." "I insist." Benson turned to Harriet. "My dear, I've arranged accommodations for you at Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house until our wedding next week. You'll want to rest and refresh yourself after your ordeal." Harriet nodded mechanically, her eyes straying to Quinn's impassive face. "Mr. Jacobson saved our lives, Mr. Benson. We owe him far more than a dinner." Indeed," Benson agreed jovially. "Well then, 7 o'clock at my home. It's the large white house at the end of Main Street. You can't miss it." Quinn hesitated before giving a curt nod. "I have business to attend to first. Thank you for the invitation." As Benson led Harriet away toward the boarding house, she glanced back to see Quinn standing alone in the street, his tall figure somehow solitary despite the bustling town around him. He raised a hand in a brief farewell, and then turned toward the livery stable, leading his horse away. Mrs. Wilkins, a kindly widow with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, showed Harriet to a small but clean room where a copper tub awaited. "Mr. Benson arranged for your bath," she explained. "Said his bride would want to wash away the trail dust before dinner." The hot bath was heaven after days of travel, but as Harriet soaked in the steaming water, her thoughts kept returning to Quinn. The way he'd lifted each woman onto his horse, one by one. The patient manner in which he'd taught them to survive on the trail. The quiet conversations beneath star-filled skies. By comparison, Harold Benson's fussy attention to appearances and his obvious pride in his material success left her cold. He was exactly as his letters had portrayed him, a successful businessman seeking a proper wife to complete his established life. Dinner at Harold Benson's home was an elaborate affair, with fine china and crystal glasses that seemed oddly out of place in the frontier town. Quinn arrived precisely at 7, dressed in clean but simple clothes, his hair still damp from washing. Harold dominated the conversation, expounding at length about his business successes and his position on the town council. Quinn said little, answering direct questions politely, but offering nothing more. Only when the topic turned to the journey did he become more animated, praising Harriet's courage and resourcefulness. "Miss Norton showed remarkable fortitude," he said, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "She insisted on being the last to leave the stranded wagon, ensuring her companions were safely rescued first." Harold beamed with proprietary pride. "Well, I always knew I had chosen a woman of exceptional character. Your letters revealed a sensible nature, my dear." After dinner, Harold suggested Quinn might like to see his collection of books, a luxury in the territory. As the men retired to the study, Harriet found herself alone in the parlor, staring out at the darkening street. "You haven't asked once about her welfare, about what she experienced, or how she feels. All you see is the proper Boston lady you ordered from a catalog, not the remarkable woman who emerged on that journey." The sound of a chair scraping back was followed by Harold's cold reply. "I think you've overstayed your welcome, Mr. Jacobson. Your attachment to my fiancée is inappropriate and unwelcome." Harriet stepped back as the study door swung open. Quinn emerged, his face set in hard lines that softened momentarily when he saw her standing there. Their eyes met in silent acknowledgement. She had heard everything. "Miss Norton," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed much more. "I wish you every happiness in your new life." Before she could respond, Harold appeared behind him, his face flushed with anger. "Harriet, my dear, would you excuse us? Mr. Jacobson was just leaving." Quinn gave a curt nod and moved toward the front door. Harriet followed, ignoring Harold's protests. "Mr. Jacobson," she called as he stepped onto the porch. "Quinn." He turned, his expression guarded. "Thank you," she said simply, aware of Harold watching from the doorway. "For everything." Something passed between them then, an unspoken current of understanding. With a final tip of his hat, Quinn strode away into the darkness. That night, Harriet lay awake in her narrow bed at the boarding house, her mind racing. The contrast between Quinn's quiet strength and Harold's pompous self-importance couldn't have been starker. One man had seen her at her worst exhausted, dirty, afraid, and had respected her all the more for her resilience. The other seemed interested only in the proper Boston lady he had ordered, not the woman she had become. By morning, her decision was made. She dressed quickly and made her way to Harold's store, where he greeted her with surprised pleasure. "My dear, I didn't expect you so early. Have you come to see your new domain?" He gestured proudly around the well-stocked general store. "Mr. Benson," she began carefully, "I need to speak with you about our arrangement." His smile faltered. "Arrangement? My dear, we're to be married. It's hardly an arrangement." "That's just it," Harriet continued, steeling herself. "I don't believe I can marry you. You're a good man with much to offer, but we want different things from life." Harold's expression hardened. "This is about that cowboy, isn't it? I saw the way he looked at you, the way you looked at him." "This is about me," Harriet corrected gently. "About who I've discovered myself to be on this journey. I'm not the same woman who agreed to marry you months ago." "You made a commitment," Harold insisted, his voice rising. "I paid for your passage. I've announced our engagement to the entire town. And I'll repay every cent," she promised. "I'll find work." "Work?" he scoffed. "What skills do you have that would be valued here? You're a genteel lady from Boston, not a frontier woman." The words struck deeper than he could know, echoing her own insecurities. But then she remembered how she'd survived the journey, how she'd learned to recognize water sources and edible plants, how she'd helped care for Mrs. Perkins when the elderly woman's strength had flagged. "I'm stronger than you think," she said quietly. "Goodbye, Mr. Benson. I truly wish you well." She walked out of the store with her head high, ignoring the curious stares of early morning shoppers who had overheard their exchange. News would spread quickly in a town this size, but she found she didn't care. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt truly free to choose her own path. Her first stop was the livery stable, where she learned that Quinn had indeed departed at dawn, heading north. The stable boy mentioned he'd been asking about a property called the Carson Place. With directions from the helpful boy, Harriet set out on foot, following the road north out of town. The walk was long, But after her recent journey across the plains, a few miles seemed a small distance to cover for the chance to speak her heart. She found him just where the stable boy had described, a modest parcel of land with a small cabin and corral, situated near a clear running stream. Quinn was examining the cabin's roof when she approached, his back to her. "Needs new shingles," she called out, smiling as he whirled around in surprise. "And probably a woman's touch inside." Quinn stared at her as if she might be a mirage. "Harriet, what are you doing here?" "Looking for my future," she replied simply, closing the distance between them. "If it's still available." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Benson, we'll find someone better suited to the life he offers." She stopped before him, suddenly uncertain despite her bold words. "That is, if there's a place for me here." Quinn's weathered face softened into a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "I was planning to make an offer on this place today. It's not much compared to what Benson could give you. The cabin's small, the work will be hard, and there's no guarantee of success." "Does it have room for dreams?" she asked, her heart pounding. "Endless room," he promised, taking her hands in his. "But are you certain, Harriet? This isn't the comfortable life you came west to find." "No," she agreed, looking around at the wild beauty surrounding them. "It's better. It's real. When you lifted me onto your horse that first day, something changed inside me. I didn't understand it then, but I do now." Her eyes met his, unwavering. "The plains showed me who I truly am, Quinn Jacobson, and who I want to be if you'll have me." His answer came not in words, but in action as he drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of the vast territory surrounding them. When they finally parted, his smile was brighter than the New Mexico sun overhead. "I think," he said softly, his forehead resting against hers, "that the plains couldn't possibly hold the gratitude I feel right now." 6 months later, Quinn and Harriet Jacobson stood hand in hand on the porch of their now thriving homestead. The cabin had been expanded, the corral now held 6 fine horses, and the first crops were coming in strong. News had spread of Quinn's skill with horses, bringing a steady stream of business. The ceremony had been simple, performed by the traveling preacher with Mrs. Wilkins and several neighbors as witnesses. Mrs. Perkins, now recovered and serving as the local schoolteacher, had given the bride away. As the sun set over the plains that had both threatened their lives and brought them together, Harriet leaned into her husband's embrace. "Any regrets?" Quinn asked, his arm tightening around her waist. Harriet shook her head, watching as the golden light transformed the landscape into something magical. "Not one. Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't come along that day. Some things are meant to be," Quinn replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Like a cowboy finding a Boston lady stranded in the wilderness." And lifting her onto his horse, Harriet added with a smile. "One by one," he agreed, returning her smile with his own. "Though you were the only one who truly captured my heart." As darkness fell over the New Mexico territory, the plains around them seemed to hum with contentment, as if somehow aware that the story that had begun with a desperate rescue had transformed into something enduring and true, a love strong enough to weather whatever challenges the frontier might bring.